Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Tom Kelly. This is Clean Cut Audio, and expanding upon last week's video of phasing, we're going to be talking about room reverberation today, and we're going to see how this all ties in, but this is going to be a very long, very in-depth video about reverberation. All right, let's do it. The first thing we need to talk about is what is reverberation, or what is sometimes shortened to reverb. Essentially, it is the sound coming from your voice or any source and being bounced off of your walls over and over and over again, which creates this lingering effect of just the sound not decaying. It's not being absorbed by anything. So when you have reflective walls, think of like your high school gym. You yell, hello, and it just goes on forever. We have a lot of reverb in this room because there's no absorption on the walls, and it's a very large room, which causes that sound to just kind of bounce around for very long distances over and over. Now, when we think about our gym, we think of the very long reverb time. So people think small room means short reverb time. There's like an ounce of truth to that, but it's a very half truth, and we will be talking about that as well. But I want to start off just talking about why reverb is bad and how it affects your sound. The first thing is podcasts, radio, broadcast just don't typically have reverb in them. That's not what we're going for. Maybe if we're in music production and we're trying to add some space to the vocals or the instruments, we might have a little bit of reverb in there, but that's not dialogue. That's not spoken word medium. So it just sounds bad. It's not what it's supposed to be like. I mean, I think of podcasts as you listening in on a conversation with your friends. And if you're sitting across from the table having a conversation, you don't want to hear all the noise around you. You don't want to hear the reverberance of the walls. You want just the human voice so that it's as intelligible as possible. And what reverb does is it decreases the intelligibility of the speech. As if I were to blur this video right now, you can kind of make out what's going on or what I'm saying, but it's a little bit harder to comprehend everything. So if we just wipe off that lens a bit and it's back to a clear picture, it's much easier to understand what's going on. So reverb decreases intelligibility with the longer the reverb tail and the louder the reverb is. So that's number one. It doesn't sound good. Number two, I have a camera overhead here, and I'm going to try to demonstrate how reverb affects editing with a visual. We're going to listen to the same example later, but I think visuals can be super helpful sometimes. So right here, we have kind of the representation of a waveform. We have the word and it's. All right, so there's a mouth click in there. This is pretty typical of someone who hasn't taken years of speech classes. Lots of mouth clicks, lots of ums that tail off from other words, and it's kind of a mess. So if we wanted to edit this, and we have a perfectly dry signal, dry meaning no reverb, wet meaning reverb, we could make a breakpoint here at the it's, one at the dum. So now if we kind of shuffle delete this, we have something that says and it's. Get a little bit of the D in this other track here, so it says and it's. That's perfect. That's super easy. We can edit that very quickly. It's like the in the mouth click never happened. But here's the problem when we have some reverb. It's, again, that sound that kind of lingers through the track. It stays longer than the initial word itself. So we're going to kind of visualize this here. We have the word and. I'm going to draw its reverb tail. It's kind of coming out here. It's decaying over time. Fill that in. So this is reverb. And then, so that's going to be the dum. This is kind of coming out of the here, and it's going to decay at the same rate as the other one because, again, we're in the same room, so this is all going to decay at the same rate. The mouth click is going to be a monster of an edit, and that's going to click all through here. And it's is going to be a little reverberant as well, but we're not super worried about it because the edit is happening before that. So we can already see that with this picture alone, the intelligibility has gone down significantly. There's all these other colors, there's these other lines coming in here. And again, if this is audio, it's not going to distinguish in the waveform reverberation from the source signal. So that's just going to be a blur. It's going to be a mess. It's going to be really hard to understand what's going on here. So if we try to make this same edit, we now have reverberation from the coming through here. The mouth click is going in through the word it's. So if we make the same edit like we did before, we're going to shuffle, ripple, delete this over. We've got quite a few things here. We're going to have to probably move this edit over so it catches some of the D's. So it's not and it's and it's. All right. So we can see quite a few things going on. Initially, we have the reverb from that D getting cut off immediately, instantaneously. And if we know anything about editing, that cutting something right in the middle shows that it's an edit. And again, a good edit is an edit that goes unnoticed. We can't be cutting right in the middle of a sound because it's clear something was manipulated there. So we have the reverb tail getting cut off immediately. And then we're going into the word it's, and we can see some blue reverb tails in here and some green reverb tails. So we only wanted the word it's, but it brought in all that reverberation from and especially the mouth click. So what we're going to hear is the word it's, but this kind of sizzly S or clicking sound from the mouth click coming through the it's. So we're bringing a lot of other noise into the signal while we're trying to edit it. So it's not a clear edit and it's going to sound bad. I mean, it's going to be obvious that something was done there because there's sounds apparently coming from nowhere, coming in and out of this signal, and that's not a good thing. I mean, so we got reverb. It sounds bad in general, and it's bad to edit around. We're going to hop into Pro Tools here. And in Pro Tools, we have a couple of claps, just me clapping in my room. What I did was, this is a dry signal, and then I printed that signal with some reverberation beneath it. And this is about a 400 millisecond reverb tail. I have some clients with reverb way less than this. I can't imagine what type of room they are in to make reverb this bad, but this is not atypical of shows that I work on. We're going to listen to the dry signal first. And then this is that signal with a reverb tail, so this would be like an untreated room. So let's, super roughly, this is not very scientific, but we're going to calculate the difference in reverb time here. So we're going to listen to the dry signal and try to find a point in this waveform where we don't hear any signal once we hit start. So a little bit. There's barely anything after this point, and let's listen to the reverb signal. Quite a bit of clap beyond there. So whatever this distance is here, what is that? 200 milliseconds. So 0.2 of a second, we have clap here that is not up top. You understand what I'm saying? So this clap finishes way before this one does. So we're going to have to work around all this extra 0.2 of a second time where there's sound where there really shouldn't be. And if we zoom in on this waveform, we could even see it looks like it stops around here, and on the reverb it stops maybe around here. So there's quite a distance there. And we're going to listen to the speech I was demoing on the paper. We're going to listen to it now. It's going to be and mouth click it's. This is a dry signal, and it's not a big deal. And oh god, that mouth click, it kills me to even have you listen to that, but this is the same signal with the same reverb time from the claps. And it's not a big deal. It's maybe a little bit loud, but we hear that this reverb is short enough where it kind of comes together with the speech itself. And this is something called the Haas effect. This is maybe a little bit a little bit beyond that, but Helmut Haas in the late 1940s, the Haas effect says that a signal that arrives very closely to the original signal, they're kind of summed together rather than hearing two distinct signals. And this is in delay, and it's also a little bit prevalent in reverb as well. Now, again, I'm not the acoustic expert, so I don't want to talk too much about it for fear of saying something that's not exactly 100% accurate, because once misinformation is in the world, it's very hard to correct it. People hear that one thing, it's locked in their brains, and they never question it because it was said by someone that maybe they trusted or looked up to, and I don't want to get this wrong. But when a reverb time is pretty short, it's easy to hear it combined with the original signal, and it's hard to distinguish original signal from the reverb time. And we're hearing a little bit of that in this wet signal with the reverb. But I'm going to demonstrate the editing as I did on the paper to try to get rid of this in the dry signal, and we can hear how different it is compared to the wet one. So let's find our edit points here. And all right, so there's the D. I'm going to leave a little bit of D. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. It's not a big, it's not a big. All right, so this is the part we want to edit out. So I'm going to mute that, drag it all over, throw in a crossfade, and it's not a big deal. Ooh, a little bit too much D on that, so I'm going to fade that down, and it's not a big deal. Actually, I don't like having all the D from the and on there, so I'm going to fade that pretty much out completely, and it's not a big deal. All right, fade into the it's a little abrupt, and it's not a big deal. All right, so that's kind of a hidden fade right there. That's not really that bad. You could probably work on it a little bit more, and it's not a big deal. So it sounds like nothing was ever there. That's a pretty invisible fade. Let's do the same thing with the reverb track. All right, I'm gonna bring this all over, fade that out, fade this in. Let's try to get it how we have it up top. And let's listen to this now. And it's not a big deal. And it's not a big deal. So we have that reverb tail coming into the it's from the mouth click. And it's a lot harder to hide this now. It's not a big deal. Yeah, let's try to get this completely out. And it's not a big deal. And it's not a big. And it's not a big deal. And it's not a big. So we kind of had this like going into the it's because there's some and there's some mouth click from what we edited out still in this signal. And let's listen to the difference between these two tracks. Dry, and it's not a big deal, and wet, and it's not a big deal. It's a lot harder to disguise this edit. And again, we don't want to hear edits. And it's not a big deal. It's not the worst. And it's not a big deal. But that it's not a big deal. It's rough. I mean, I feel like most people would hear that edit. And again, we don't want to hear edits. So having a reverberant room is bad for editing. All right, and here is a more practical example. This is a recording of my buddy Pat from the Reminiscent podcast, the music commentary podcast that I do with my best friend. We just put out episode 156 this week, talking about one of my favorite albums of all times, The Upsides by the Wonder Years. Now, Pat, bless his soul, he is working with what he's got, which is very little. I sent him a Shure SM58 and a Motu M2 interface, and then he took it upon himself to hang coat racks and sweaters and towels and blankets all over his room to try to work on the reverberance of his room. And we're going to talk about why that stuff is pretty ineffective for the most part. It controls some stuff, mostly the high frequencies, but we're going to listen to the problem that I have with his voice, and it's mainly in the low end. And this is a lot of kind of that phasing conversation that we were talking about last week, which was your voice going into your microphone and then a few milliseconds later going into your co-host microphone across the table from you. It causes phasing. It causes really weird frequency issues. Well, what we have here with his reverberation is we have what are called early reflections, which is a much shorter time than what reverberation would be. It's hitting the walls. It's coming right back to the microphone slightly later than his voice, and it's causing issues with the frequency response of his voice that's very hard to control. So we're going to listen to this with the EQ off. This is all the other processing without the EQ. We're going to listen to this real quick.
Panic at the Disco came out with a record like 2 years ago, and you were like, is he the king of pop? It's like this quarter. Like, yeah, it didn't quite outsell Rumors by Fleetwood Mac.
So we can hear a little bit of reverberation in the higher frequencies, which I could probably control with Isotope RX D reverb module, but I didn't because it affects the rest of the sound. But here's my EQ curve for him, and we can see in the low end that there's quite a lot of buildup. And he's not super close to the microphone. He's probably 3 or 4 inches away, so it shouldn't be that present. But what we have is reverberation overwhelming the sound of his voice. So I tried to cut out quite a bit of this low end.
Panic at the Disco came out with a record like 2 years ago, and you were like, is he the king of pop? It's like this quarter. Like, yeah, it didn't quite sell out. Panic at the Disco came out with a record.
So there's an overwhelming amount of 125, 126 hertz. But when I cut it as much as it needs to be cut, then it's almost like too much, and there's been no good area. It's either too much or it's too little, and I'll kind of play with it as we're listening to the episode.
Panic at the Disco came out with a record like 2 years ago, and you were like, is he the king of pop? It's like
too
this
muddy.
Quarter. Like, Panic at the Disco came out with a record like 2 years ago, and you were like, is he the king of pop? It's like this quarter. Like, yeah, it didn't quite sell out.
So it's been really hard to find a middle ground of enough low end without too much, and this is the reason why. Okay, so let me explain what's going on here in Pro Tools. On the top track, we have the dry clap from before. The middle track is just the reverberation coming off of the dry clap. And then the bottom clap is both of them together, the source signal and the reverb, which is how we would hear it in real life. We'd hear both of them summed together. But for the purpose of this demonstration, I separated them out. So we have dry clap, just the reverb, and then we have the dry clap and the reverb together. Okay, so what happens when my co-host is putting these sweaters on the wall, and what happens when people buy 1-inch foam panels, is that it doesn't deaden all the sound. It only deadens the high frequencies. And we're going to demonstrate kind of what happens in Pro Tools, but this is very important to understand. Absorption materials has what is called a noise reduction coefficient, often spelled out NRC for short. And this is a scale from 0 to 1, with 0 being 0%, 1 being 100%. How much does this material absorb at a certain frequency band? What percentage does it absorb? 1-inch foam material hardly absorbs anything under 1,000 hertz or 1 kilohertz, which is where a lot of our vocal presence lives. And the problem you run into is when you get down to those lower end, the low mids and the lows, kind of like those woofy frequencies that account for a lot of the muddiness of a signal, 250 hertz, 120 hertz, stuff like that. It's not absorbing any of that material, any of those frequencies. So when you put 1-inch foam panels on the wall, you're not getting rid of your reverberations. You're only getting rid of the high end. So what you're left with is a lot of muddy reverberations. And when you put yourself in something like a closet or a small room, there's something called room modes. And I don't want to speak too much to any of this because I don't want to get it wrong. But essentially, we have what are standing waves, which is a buildup of a certain frequency. And the smaller your room gets, the bigger issue you have with these low frequencies. So just try to wrap your head around when you're in a small room with 1-inch foam panels, all you're really doing, it sounds like you're boosting the low end reverb in this room, and it's really bad. That's a problem my co-host is having. What I need to do is essentially EQ the reverb, get the low end of the reverb out there. But since it's integrated with his signal, I'm also EQing his voice out. So that's why it's been really hard to find a sweet spot of not losing too much low end, but also not having too much so that it's muddy. It's because I'm EQing both when really I want to be able to separate the reverb from the source tone. So that's what I'm going to do in Pro Tools here. This is just the reverb and a broadband absorption panel, which is the 2 foot by 4 foot insulation, usually wrapped in an acoustical fabric. That is going to absorb a lot of the frequency response, even to 100 hertz. These small panels are not. So we have an EQ curve that's probably something like this with those 1-inch foam panels. It's not really doing anything below 1 kilohertz and is kind of trimming off that high end. And if we listen to, this is kind of mimicking what a 1-inch foam panel would do. So this is raw reverb, and this is with a 1-inch foam panel. So it's taken off some of that harsh high end, but we're still getting a lot of reverb. And if we get like maybe a 3-inch foam panel like I have, it's doing a better job. But again, a lot of pressure lives down here in like the 200, 250 hertz. So when you have a broadband absorber or very good absorption, rather than kind of EQing that reverb signal, it's just like we're turning it down. So we get this instead. Right? That's a lot better. And when we sum that with our source tone, you can hardly hear it compared to this. So 1-inch foam panels not really doing much good. And especially if you're in a small room like a closet, your signal is going to be so boomy. My room, it's considered a small room, and small rooms are not great for listening environments. And it's not good unless you have some really good broadband absorption. So we run into issues when we're trying to EQ our sound because we're getting the sum of our reverb and the source signal, the voice, and it's causing us to never really find that good middle ground of EQ because every move you make is doubling the effect because we have the source tone and the reverb. And again, when it comes back to phasing, we're getting a slightly out of time signal. So my voice, it's spreading out everywhere. It's not going in a straight line. It's not even a narrow cone. It's going everywhere. So my voice is going right into the microphone, and then a few milliseconds later, it's going off the wall and back into the microphone. And as we saw in that video, slightly out of time signals cause phasing because I don't want to say waveforms because that's not super accurate, but the sound is slightly out of time, it's out of phase, and it's going to start canceling those frequencies out. And it's going to be really prevalent again in the high end. So we're going to be left with muted high end signal due to phasing, and it's going to make it sound like the low end is boosted. We also have the reverb coming in back into the microphone, which is going to have an enhanced low end. So what you're left with is like my co-host signal. It's really boomy. You can't really hear the reverb. It doesn't sound like this long reverb tail, but we have this psychoacoustic effect of the Haas effect where the two signals are kind of summing together. They're the early reflections, the very early reflections, which is a shorter delay, shorter reverb time than what we would typically call reverberation, and it's summing it together. It's a really boomy signal, and we haven't put the broadband absorbers on the walls yet. But these are the issues that we're dealing with, and it's also really hard because those short reflections cause his signal to sound like a little more lively, whereas mine is bone dry. It is scorched earth in this room. I mean, I have very, very little reverberation time in here. So when you hear my signal compared to his, I think objectively I have a better signal, but because his is more lively and it's got kind of that reverb time, it almost sounds like mine is very dull compared to his. And that's kind of another unfortunate adverse effect, is the better signal can actually be made to sound slightly worse because it's considered dull compared to the reverberant signal. So we've got a lot of really big issues here with reverb, with untreated rooms. And again, we're not talking about soundproofing. These foam panels are not soundproofing. It's sound absorption, acoustic absorption, sound conditioning, something of that nature. It's not blocking sound from getting in or going out. It is affecting the sound in the room, and it's kind of tuning it so that we get less reverberations, and we want less reverberations across the board, not just in the high end. So to sum the whole video up, I know this was a lot. It kind of sounds scatterbrained coming out, so I hope that on the receiving end, it's a little better and well thought out, but there was like a lot to cover, and it's a lot to try to fit into 20 minutes or whatever this is going to end up being. Reverberation is a much worse problem than you think it is. It's not just that it makes the sound unprofessional or like, it's causing many more issues than you probably consider. It makes it much harder to edit because we're not getting those transparent edits. It makes it harder to mix because we're getting the summing of the source signal and the reverberation. So you're getting overwhelmed with typically a lot of low end, and it's a lot harder to get a good signal out of it. And the relation between a reverberant signal and a dry signal is actually going to make the proper, better sounding signal possibly sound really dull in comparison. But it's not dull. It's just when you're comparing one thing to another. And that's a hard thing to do in audio, but we want a dry signal. And it's for increasing intelligibility. Again, we are doing these podcasts because we have a message. We have something to share with the world. And we don't want to make our audience work to understand it. We want to make it as easy as possible for them to absorb all the content that you're giving them. And the best way to do that is with great sound, because it not only affects the intelligibility, it affects the perceived authority. I've mentioned it quite a few times. There's an article from USC that showed audiences who listened to a doctor explaining something that they couldn't quite comprehend, a little bit above their, not intelligence level, but something that they haven't studied. They're trying to explain this, and they ranked the doctors on the level of trustworthiness. And across the board, the audio recording with the better audio, people claimed that that doctor, the same doctor, mind you, was more trustworthy than that same recording with the audio quality degraded. So if you want your audience to connect with you, to believe you, and to really absorb your message, give them a clean, dry signal. Now, I know in the earlier part of the episode, I mentioned that I'm frustrated that people talk about the what and not the how and why. I understand that I haven't really gone too much into how to deaden your room, how to control those reflections, but two very quick things. 1-inch foam is not going to do much. You want to go for at least 3-inch wedge foam, and even that is not ideal. I understand that that's what my room is right now. I have 48 square feet of 3-inch wedge foam in my room, but even that's not ideal. We want to look at absorption insulation panels, which is going to be rock wool or 703 Owens Corning insulation that is built into a wood or an MDF medium density. Oh man, I used to be a woodworker. That's embarrassing. MDF. It is pretty similar to particle board. You build a frame, put an insulation in it, and the important thing is we wrap it in a fabric, a material that allows the sound to fully pass through it so that it's absorbed. If we use a material that is too tightly woven, the sound is going to be diffused off of the fabric and not fully be absorbed. So we want to build some kind of foam panel, something absorbent. A lot of people will say, put some pillows and blankets all around your room, and I don't know if a single household has enough pillows or blankets to absorb the sound as much as we need it to. I've seen on some pretty reputable websites nailing moving blankets to the wall, and I can guarantee you nailing a moving blanket to the wall is not going to be effective. If we have it off the wall a bit, if we drape a moving blanket over our head and over the microphone, that's even more effective than putting it right on the wall. But when we put it right on the wall, the very, very, very high frequencies that probably don't even matter will be absorbed, but everything else is going to come right back. Nailing a moving blanket to the wall is not going to do much. But the acoustics, the small room acoustics, is a different video, and I'm going to bring in an expert on that one because there's a lot of math involved. But essentially, 1-inch foam, not really going to do much good. And the more 1-inch foam you put on your walls, the more you're increasing those bass frequencies of the reverberation to come through. That's going to make your sound muddy. It's going to make it harder to understand what's going on. Again, there's a lot in this video, and it's a little bit scatterbrained. I'm sorry, I'm not a professional presenter. I'm just a guy on YouTube. So take it for what you will. There's a lot of other good videos out there on small room acoustics. I encourage you to Discover as much as you can. Don't just take it from me. Don't just take anything from me. Don't just take anything from anyone. You need to discover as much material as you can. Find out what makes the most sense to you. Find out what works for you. And if you have a friend that's working on podcasting and they've got a really echoey room, feel free to share this video with them along with several others. There's great material online and on specific small room acoustics websites that deal with this issue. But thank you so much for sitting through this long video. I doubt anyone's going to make it all the way through, but I'm trying to cram in as much as I can in a short amount of time. If you're dying to hear more, we do have the brand new Clean Cut Audio podcast available everywhere. You can find all the links to stream and download at cleancutaudio.com/podcast. Don't forget, we also have some pretty fun and snarky audio t-shirts. You can see them on the bottom of your screen there. You can find those at cleancutaudio.com/shop. And Podfest is coming up soon in March of 2020. I will be there. I will be in this jacket. Please feel free to say hello. I'd love to talk to everyone that I can. I go there to meet people. That's pretty much what I'm going to be doing all 3 days, is just hanging out with people. So please find me. Let's have a conversation. And I'd love to see how I can better help you and serve you in your podcasting journey. The last thing, please subscribe to the channel and make sure you ring the bell so that you don't miss a video. I'm going to be putting these out every week. Every week that I can. I'm going to be out of town for about a month, so I'm recording like 4 videos today, trying to get ahead. It's a lot of work, and I really appreciate you being here, and I'd appreciate it if you subscribed and stick around for all the future videos. Lots of cool stuff coming up, bringing lots of cool people on board. It's going to be a good time. But that is it. I've gone significantly over, and I apologize, but thank you so much for being here. I'm Tom Kelly. This is Clean Cut Audio. I'll see you later. Bye.